Hey guys, so I just wanted to let you know that even though in the video I say I'm going to cover the second, third, and fourth stage of Starcraft 2, in that video it ended up being like really long, so I've broken it up into separate videos. Those videos will come out in the next few days, so see them all. I just wanted to let you know at the start of this video that that's what's happening. Sorry about this kind of crappy cut, but easiest way to do it because I felt like I had a really good take for the initial video. Anyway guys, enjoy the video. Hey guys, what's up? I'm filtersc. Welcome back for another video. This one is going to be all about simplifying StarCraft 2 and kind of breaking it down into smaller groups so that it's going to be much easier to manage. We're going to talk about strategy. We're also going to talk about micro, macro, and multitask within this video. Kind of the 4 different groups of StarCraft 2 and how the game relates. Don't worry guys, there's going to be a bunch of gameplay footage, but I just wanted to start off at this screen so that we can kind of get an idea of what we're trying to do with the game. Now, the first thing is a lot of people go, oh my god, this game is super complex. What do I make? Like, how do I counter this particular unit? How do I beat X unit? How do I beat Y unit? And you really have to stop thinking about that because StarCraft 2, in all honesty, the vast majority of strategy happens before you even get into the game. You want to have a basic idea of what your core composition is going to be when you go into the game based on your opponent. Not necessarily a super strict build order because I know a lot of people talk about that, but you want to have an idea of what kind of composition you're going to go for. And then in the early game, all you're really trying to do is defend what your opponent might throw at you, get to the mid game, and have your composition ready to go. Sometimes people might throw like an odd snowball or an odd weird build or something at you. Usually you should be able to beat that the second time around. You might lose to it the first time, but it ends up not being too big of a deal. You don't really have to worry about if your opponent does something really weird. Typically, your core composition, if it's executed well, is going to be much more effective than whatever they're going for. It doesn't really necessarily matter, especially if it's something kind of weird and obnoxious. You don't need to worry about it that much, right? You want to play kind of how you want to play with your units, and you can kind of forget about trying to hard counter everything. You don't need to worry about that. You don't need to stress out about building, Vikings as your anti-air unit. It really doesn't matter that much, right? So with that being said, we're going to jump right on into it. We're going to talk about the strategy section and how you can really simplify your gameplay before you even go into it. One of the best examples of this ever is a player by the name of Maru, who's a professional Terran player, probably the best Terran near the end of Heart of the Swarm. And when he was playing against Protoss, he wasn't making Vikings or Ghosts, which are considered the 2 counter units that you're going to need to make if you want to counter High Templar, and if you want to counter Colossus, you would make Vikings. And Maru didn't do that. Maru stuck to his basic units, which were the Marine, the Marauder, and finally, Widow Mines with a few medevacs kind of sprinkled in, and he would do a lot of drop play and utilize his units really well. He wasn't reacting to what the Protoss was doing at all. He didn't care. He was like, I'm going to make a lot of this stuff, and I'm going to beat you with it because I'm really good. And that's kind of what you want to do, especially when you're first starting out, is keep it really simple. Don't worry about what your opponent's making. Just focus on whatever your core composition is going to be for that particular game, and try to get out as much of it as you possibly can. Learn how to use those units. Learn how to win situations that might be a little bit weird or a little bit tricky. I know especially when an expansion comes out, some of the mid to lower leagues can be really messed up because people make all kinds of crazy stuff. And it can be a little bit screwy when you're trying to figure out the game and trying to learn it. So you don't need to worry necessarily about any kind of hard counter stuff. What you want to do, though, is instead of going, oh my god, I have 17 Terran units, I have like 20 Protoss units to make, because obviously the Reaver and stuff doesn't actually exist in the game. I look at Zerg and I've got like 20 units I can make. And, then you have to worry about your opponent being able to make all those units, right? And it ends up being really big and really scary. Well, before you even get into the game, you want to kind of figure out what your composition is going to be. If you're a Terran player, are you going to play kind of a more bio style, or are you going to play mech? Figure out what units are going to work for you and what units you want to make. If you're playing Protoss, are you going to play like more gateway heavy, or are you going to use disruptors, or are you going to go for Colossus, right? Maybe you want to go for carriers. There's all sorts of different ways to play, but you have to kind of limit your options a little bit and keep the game as simple as possible, and try to stick to a core unit or 2, and then support that unit with units that complement it really well, right? So if you're a Zerg player, something like going for the Roach is really good because you can make Roaches and Ravagers, and then when you want to complement it, you can complement the kind of crappy anti-air with some Corruptors and Vipers later on, right? That would be your complement to your initial style, and then from there you're not really worried about making Zerglings or Banelings. You're not going to try to make a bunch of Hydralisks and Lurkers. You might make a few Broodlords because you can make them out of Corruptors. You're not going to worry about Ultralisks, even though currently they're really strong. you're not going to worry about what your opponent's making even. You're just going to go, I'm going to stick on Roach Ravager, and then if I need anti-air, I'll get some Corruptors and Vipers. And I might even, start going that direction anyway because I can use those units effectively against my opponent, right? You notice how you're not necessarily trying to counter your opponent. You're trying to focus on your own playstyle. If you're a Terran player like the majority of my games I play Terran, for me, what I like to do is I use a lot of Marines, I use a lot of siege tanks, and from there I'll complement my kind of core units, which realistically are your Marines and your tanks. I'll complement that with some medevacs, maybe a couple of Liberators to keep myself safe. Sometimes I'll even throw in a Cyclone really early because that lets me kill off Warp Prisms and that kind of stuff, right? But I'm probably not going to make very many Vikings. I'm certainly not going to be making any Thoras. Battlecruiser's not on my radar. The odd Banshee here and there for harassment is a possibility. Probably not going to be making Hellions or anything like that. I'm not that worried about all the different options that I have. I'm keeping it very simple. I'm going to stick to my Marines. If I'm playing against Protoss, I'll probably use Marauders because they're a little bit tankier and they can handle some of the high damage Protoss units a little easier without instantly dying like Marines kind of do. But I'm not going to overly complicate my strategy, and I already know what it is going into the game, right? If I'm going to play against a Protoss player, probably actually not going to make very many siege tanks, to be totally honest. I'm going to stick to, Marine, Marauder, and Medevac, and that's probably all I'm going to make. I might throw in a few other units, based on the situation and my experience over the 5,000 or 6,000 games of Starcraft 2 that I've played, but that's all I'm really going to make when I go into that game, right? I'm not thinking about all these different options. I'm not worried about how do I counter this or counter that. I'm going to use my units to the best of my ability and to the most effect that I can possibly get out of them, right? Same thing if you're Protoss. Maybe you want to focus on, a lot of Blink Stalkers, right? And you're going to use some Adepts to kind of front line for them. And eventually you're going to get some Disruptors, and that's kind of all. Maybe you'll get some Immortals too, because Immortals are really strong and they fit in quite well with that type of army. But you're not going to worry that much about, warping in a ton of Zealots. You're not going to worry about any of the air stuff because that's not your focus, right? At the same time, like if you wanted to go to Carrier, maybe you open Stargate, you get an Oracle out really early, and then you get some Phoenix to prevent drops, and then you transition into starting to build up your carriers, and you'll use something cheap like an Adept or a Zealot as kind of your gateway ground army in the early game to just stay alive, right? So what you want to do is simplify your composition before you even go into the game. Don't focus on what your opponent's doing or what's scary or what he might be doing. Focus on what you want to do and keep it really, really simple. You want a couple of core units that are going to be the focus of your army. Once again, we'll go back to Terran. So in my case, be the Marine, the Marauder, maybe the Siege Tank, although you don't necessarily get that high of number, right? It does depend on who I'm playing against. And then from there, I want to support my Marine Marauder with medevacs. I want to support them with a lot of tanks. Maybe I'll get a Widowmine here and there. Maybe I'll get some Liberators here and there. But that's not my focus, and I'm not going to build those units unless there's something specific I'm trying to accomplish. So my experience has dictated that in this particular case, a Liberator would be the a good option. And I'm not going to drastically be trying to throw down like 5 starports to build a bunch of Liberators, right? I'm going to use my 1 starport that I've been producing my medevacs out to get a few Liberators onto the field. I'm not looking to drastically change everything, right? So I'm going to focus my upgrades around infantry upgrades, and when I do get my armory, I'll start getting some upgrades for my siege tanks or something like that. But my main focus is getting my Marines with stim and combat shield, getting Marauders slow, getting my engineering bay upgrades out. I'm not worried about anything else, and that's what you need to do when you're talking about the strategic part of StarCraft 2. So with that being said, we're going to jump into actual gameplay now, and we're going to talk about your macro, your micro, and your multitask stage.